Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I am Leah Prime, and thank you so much for joining the Invisible Night School for a special roundtable with Dr. Massimo Teodorani. For those of you just joining, the Invisible Night School is a small consortium of researchers exploring all variety of topics, including UAP, UFOs, high strangeness, and the phenomena. You can find us at theinvisiblenightschool.com. Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to our channel and join our Discord included in the links in the video description. Without any further delay, I'd like to welcome my co-hosts, the brilliant Campbell Morera and the inimitable Luis Caetano, who's joining us in voice-only mode. How are both of you? How are you doing today, gentlemen?
Very well, thank you.
Pretty good, thank you.
And how are you?
Oh, I'm a little pinch of heaven. I'm super excited for the conversation today. Candidly, I can tell I'm getting old because I feel way livelier at 2 o'clock than at our normal 9 o'clock live stream.
Right.
I'm not being propped up with late afternoon coffee and ADD medication. So I'm ready to roll. I want to go through Dr. Teodorani's background and bio quick before we welcome him onto the stream. So Dr. Massimo Teodorani is a northern Italian astrophysicist. He obtained his degree in astronomy and a PhD in stellar physics at the University of Bologna. As a researcher at the astronomical observatories of I studied Russian and Yiddish, not Italian. How do I say this? Bologna and Naples, and later at the INAF Radio Telescope of Medicina. He was involved in research on explosive star phenomena and more recently in the search for extrasolar planets and extraterrestrial intelligence with the SETI project. Dr. Teodorani has addressed the European Parliament on the subject of UFOs and was the lead science advisor for the EMBLA research project in Hestland, Norway. In 2021, he became a research affiliate of the Galileo Project and is a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, also known as SCU. He's published on quantum physics, atomic and nuclear physics, astronomy, astrophysics, bioastronomy, and physics of anomalous atmospheric phenomena, human consciousness, and aerospace studies. So without any further ado, Dr. Teodorani, I'd like to welcome you to the Invisible Night School.
Thank you for having me here.
Yes, we're delighted you could join us. It was wonderful of Campbell to make the connection. I know he particularly has been invested in your research and in your study of UAP and anomalous phenomena. So big props to Campbell for getting you here today.
I'm very excited to speak with you, Dr. Teodorani. And maybe we could get started with just a little bit of your background now that you're involved with the Galileo project, especially, and it's picking up steam. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you found yourself in Norway in 1994 at a conference presenting a series of slides that you wrote up on how to use an instrumental observation station to treat UFOs like a star in the Earth's atmosphere. Pretty much what Dr. Loeb's doing now. Yeah. So how did you find yourself in that position?
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you that after the end of my PhD, I was waiting for a postdoc position, and it took some months before having that. At that point, I felt strangely that I wanted to get more in depth in something that I didn't consider enough in my life. And it was about a UFO phenomenon. So I was hunting for books about UFOs, and I collected something like 5,000 volumes in my library. In particular, one book from a British researcher whose name is Jenny Randles, was some kind of, scientific preparation and very critical thinker. I found a book that was on the desk of a free market outside. I took the book, and the book fell on the ground, and when it fell opened on a page in which it was written, project is done. It was 1993. At that point, I noticed that some scientists, like Professor Erling Strand, and also others like Professor Adley Rutledge, for instance, in Piedmont, Missouri, tried an attempt to measure the phenomenon. Normally, we know that this kind of phenomenon is based on weakness, okay? But in that case, the instruments were used. So I was very fascinated because very quickly, having a look at all those UFO books, I got very bored, honestly, because they were only stories, okay? Some also very interesting, and this doesn't mean that I don't give a value to the witness. I think that in reality, the witness might be central in this kind of phenomenon, the interaction between the observer and the observed. But in that case, I was interested in what we can do, what kind of concrete measurements we can give, and what an astronomer can give to this kind of research. So I wrote to Erling Strand, and after 1 year, participated to a congress with all my calculations about integration times, namely technically means exposure times to obtain optimum signals to noise ratio data to understand what objectively that phenomenon might be. Signal to noise ratio is everything in science. Whatever speculation we can have, whatever sense of marvel we can have about the phenomenon, if we want to try to say this is real, we have to make sure that the ratio between the signal and the noise is very high. So we have to optimize the data that we are going to obtain. This is the main goal of the Galileo project, to obtain good data without a preconceived idea on what a phenomenon can be, and to try to analyze that using the scientific methodology, which is not something like a religion, okay? It's something that speaks about the reality in which we live. So we have to analyze the reality in the most accurate way as we can, not only for us as a sort of a Pickwick circle of science, but also for people. If we want to tell to people that phenomenon is real or is false, we have to tell how we deduce that quantitatively using mathematics, both in measurements and in theoretical modeling. Okay, so that was nice, and I thought, oh, some people got some measurements there, so I want to see what I can do, what kind of contribution I could give to this group, and then the thing started in 1994, and it's going on right now, even if in alternate situations. Okay, people attacking sometimes, but mostly going ahead. And now there is this Galileo project, to which I'm an affiliate researcher, and to which I'm trying to give my contribution. I have to say, there are many physicists, astronomers, computer scientists, engineers who are doing a lot of good work. Above all, we have to thank engineers who are now allowing us to obtain good data. So next year's will tell how it will go, and so it started, and so now it's going on.
Wonderful. And can you, so one of the things we talk about a lot on our show is the scientific method, and both in its current form and in ways it may either fall short or can be explored or reevaluated to study UAP, ufology, and anomalous phenomena. How do you consider the relationship between research and the scientific method and anomalous phenomena?
Well, as it was written also by Kuhn, Philosophy of Science, anomalies are those alarm bells that tells us several things, that something is not working in our current model, and at the same time that we probably we have anomalies because in our current model we disregarded some things that we considered not reliable and not important or something. There are some things that are behind the corner that we disregarded too much because they were not fitting the standard model. For instance, like the standard model of physics in elementary particles. So anomalies are an alarm clock to us to tell us, please do some corrections, look better at reality, don't disregard everything because something is missing. Okay, so it's our duty, also ethical duty, to consider these things and using the standard method of investigation. So this method is based on measurements, because we cannot have theories before measurements. We can have theories only after we have measurements with good data, namely with a very high signals to noise ratio. From the data and only from the data, we can deduce the theory and not vice versa. So, but we can do that also on anomalies. If we disregard anomalies, we are dishonest. We are dishonest against science, and we are dishonest against ourselves, because science is not religion, it's not politics, but it's only an how to say endeavor to increase our knowledge. I would prefer to say understanding than knowledge, because erudite knowledge it doesn't mean that we understood. What is important is to understand what's going on. So we have to have the courage. Okay, it's like a railway that cross the, how to say, the Siberian forest, not forest I mean, but those infinite lawns there, and we go on the railway, but we don't stop the train and go out and see what's there. We on the railway we think everything is linear, but there are things that are not linear. So we have to have the courage to face what goes out from our science that is perfect. That it's very well set methodologically, and we know a lot, but we have to improve something.
And just
Wonderful.
for our viewers, many are interested in the UFO subject and the consciousness subject, and so your experience is very directly relevant to that, in those two interests coming together on this subject. When you first heard about Hesdallen, and then you spoke to Assistant Professor Erling-Strand. You then got involved with his project to put in a sensor station in Hesdallen, Norway, that began in 1998. And I think it's interesting because this is the kind of thing where observations and interpretations can really deviate from the same philosophical model. So for example, like you in your field studies, you did 3 field studies, like 2000, 2001, 2002, I believe, or is it around there? And then you had your public paper published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2004. You described a bunch of observations of very interesting phenomena, and you were not at all firm in saying, this is what I saw in terms of interpretation. the observations were clear, your interpretation was left open. And still your results, the observations themselves, they were not accepted, I would say, in the mainstream physics community. And so, or at least were resisted heavily because they strayed from the standard of what you would expect to see in Earth's atmosphere. And so in your own lived experience, having dedicated yourself really to this subject in practice your whole life, would you be able to just speak a little bit about that, trying to be in that middle point where you are presenting the observations while still inspiring people to be intrigued and fascinated by what you're describing?
Well, first, my duty, first of all, we didn't have enough money funding to get really good data. Some of the data were good, some were not good, compared to what we can have with the Project Galileo, for instance. There were some data that were difficult to explain. And for instance, the interpretation of what happened to my Norwegian colleagues in 1984 when they aimed a laser beam against one of those pulsing lights. And these lights seemingly were answering, increasing their pulsation rate. Well, I cannot interpret arbitrarily all of this. If I were, I don't know, a wishful thinker or of ufology, and I don't want to judge, because there are some ufologists that are excellent, okay, I know. I would say, okay, this is an answer to our laser stimulation. But we don't know if there are some photon interactions between laser and plasmas, for instance. There are things that we have to investigate still deeply. So I cannot give interpretations. I cannot offer some possibilities that are still open. Why? Because the data are not sufficiently big in number and not sufficiently high in quality. So I cannot give a definitive interpretation. I would be really very dishonest if I do that, and we would be dishonest. Science, it's not real that mainstream science didn't accept our works. In reality, there are many scientists that are really very interested in Stalin-like things. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, I see that some of these scientists wanted to, maybe in good faith, try to take what is useful to them to prove their own preconceived theories. This is not scientific, and this is not honest. And so some do that even in good faith, okay? Even my data had been used in that way. In good faith, I'm sure it was in good faith. We are not yet in a condition to say what the phenomenon is, but we are in a condition to say how the phenomenon behaves, okay? And we have a good idea about that. And but we can also say, I am fascinated by the idea of other possible intelligences from somewhere. But I can also say that some manifestations can be explained by natural phenomena. For instance, in Brazil, in the late 70s and the 80s, there was a very strange and weird phenomenon of so-called UFOs that were emitting beams of light, hitting people, or some of whom were killed or severely wounded. Everyone thought and told that, wow, these are flying saucers that are emitting a death ray against people, and they like to shoot against people with a death ray. In reality, analyzing the situation of a plasma, atmospheric plasma that is rotating very fast. I mean, something like 100 kilometers per second, and which is flattened and which has a very strong magnetic field, would have two openings on the poles, on North Pole and the South Pole of this flattened plasma, which could emit beams of energy randomly according to the turbulence of the atmosphere. So it could be a natural phenomenon. Okay, so we must be prepared to the possibility that something of nature, we don't understand everything about nature, about situation in nature, and we have to be prepared to take into account every possibility, even the most disappointing one, that could be a natural phenomenon, but something else could not be that. I'm not in a condition to tell what it is. I'm not in a situation that I have to give an interpretation. Because if I compare these, how to say, observations using instruments with the observations that we make in astrophysics or in physics, I can say, no, we have to reach a much higher level, okay, before telling this is it or this is not it. So it takes a long time to make something very well done. And with the Galileo project, we, thanks to the intelligence and the enterprise of Professor Evi Loeb, but also thanks to the good quantity of money, we can have better instruments, okay? So thanks to better instruments and competencies that can be collected together, we might understand a bit more. So, well, this is my thing so far.
Can you give us an idea of like the energies involved?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, there are several. Well, we measured because we had several ways to evaluate the distance to the phenomenon, which was about, if I well remember, 9 kilometers. And then you measure the apparent luminosity, you calculate the fact that electromagnetic waves decrease with the inverse of the square of the distance. Then you make a lot of calculations, and the energy was something like 20 kilowatt. So, but only at that time, at that moment, at that circumstance in which we were sufficiently lucky to have a measurement of distance and a measurement of the apparent luminosity that was obtained. It was with 20 kilowatt, but other scientists, even if not deducing their calculations on measurements, but only on witnesses, and I mean physicists like Jacques Vallée, Bruce Maccabee, Professor Arlie Rutledge, they deduced energies that were at least a factor 10 or even 5, even 50 or 100 more than what we measured in Esdalen. Consider that in Esdalen, we have not a standard phenomenon, but we have a series of different phenomena that for a strange reason, they coexist there. I measured 20 kilowatt. Others measured some, not deduced. You can calculate from witness evaluation, something like 500 megabytes. So it's a big luminosity.
Right. Wonderful. So we have a question from one of our audience members, from David Holtzmer. Dr. Teodorani indicated his data speaks to how the phenomena behave. I'm curious, what was the most surprising or unexpected behavior observed so far?
Yeah, it was something that had to do with the phenomenon of variability, which didn't regard only as Darwin, but also similar phenomena elsewhere in the world. The point was that the phenomenon is pulsating in a regular or semi-regular way. The reason of the pulsation was not due to the fact that the phenomenon was inflating, so increasing its radiating surface, but it was because there were many light balls that all of a sudden were being born around a common nucleus. So something like a clustering effect that was increasing the emitting surface. You can see that if being a thermal phenomenon, the luminosity, the intrinsic luminosity, increases with the square of the radius and with the fourth power of temperature. It seemed that that time the temperature was constant, but the only thing didn't change. But the only thing that was changing was the radius, but not because it was inflating, but only because there was all of a sudden this cluster of light balls that were forming around each other. It could be kind of natural phenomenon. It could be something else. We don't know yet.
And Dr. Teodorani, just to follow up on that, I know that you mentioned Dr. Saitovich from the National Academy of Sciences in Russia, his work related to the self-organization of in plasmas, and his lab work, especially at the Plasma Research Lab in St. Petersburg. He's observed in his published papers, he describes observing features in plasma that are consistent with the modern scientific definition of a living thing. And so then the definition it's sort of argued then like, well, maybe we should change the definition of life rather than saying that a plasma is alive, or maybe vice versa. Because this would you be able to, this is a good way to maybe transition into the discussion on how consciousness could relate to this subject. Would you be able to talk a little bit about your perception of sort of this self-organizing behavior in the plasmas, and maybe your attempts to interpret it at the time? Because I know that you talked, you had Gloria Nobili there with you, and I believe she has a master's in some sort of biology or something, right? Biophysics, yes, and then Dr. Marcia Adams also, and she's a biologist, I believe. So could you talk a bit about what led you to sort of bring biologists, experts in biology to the site?
Well, I speak for myself, clearly. I didn't discuss with my two colleagues, these two women, about this aspect. So because we didn't collaborate anymore, every one of us went to her own path. I speak for myself, what I think. I read the paper by Zitovich et al., Morfield from Germany, for instance, and which was published in 2007 on the New Journal of Physics. They did simulations on a computer, and they noticed that if you make interact plasma with dust particles, there is a phenomenon of spiraling of plasmas around some nuclei, simulating very much the DNA. Okay, not only the spiral pattern, but also the capability to multiply itself, like if it were a form of life. But this is plasma. This is not carbon life. Okay, I've been. This is part of my speculation, which had nothing to do with my present work. But I like to do that because I think it's stimulating. I noticed that David Bohm, quantum physicist who studied plasmas, and noticed that these plasmas had a cooperative behavior. They were behaving like a common being, only one being. all the particles were like if it was only one being. I unite this aspect with some plasmas, which are called plasmons, which are behaving like if they were where the particles are entangled together, like in quantum mechanics. I unite this with the discovery of Zitovich et al. About this strange DNA-like plasma, with the theory of consciousness by Professor Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize Physics, and Stuart Hameroff, about the theory of consciousness, where they say that a consciousness moment can arise when the microtubules in the brain are all related together in only one entity, which is really described by a wave function of quantum mechanics. When this wave function collapses, we have a consciousness moment. At some point, I told myself, but what happens if instead of microtubules in the brain, we have plasma particles? Does consciousness, is consciousness coming on or something like that? What happens when we stimulate them, these plasmas, with a laser beam? Do we trigger some kind of consciousness? I think we are very ignorant about the process of life. We don't know enough. Mm-hmm. So I like to launch this thing that is very provocative. In fact, my colleagues of SETI told me, I proposed this kind of abstract for a Congress, and they told them, never come here, we don't want to see you. Don't come to the Congress. I already published on peer-reviewed journals on astronautic. At some point I told, well, there is this possibility. Why don't we test it? Because there is a way to test it using high-speed photometer, for instance, and see what happens if there is a coded message, if there is something that let us think about intelligence. It could be a form of life that live only 3 minutes or 4 minutes. But what is life? Okay, there could be life that is coming from not from carbon and not from silicon, but from plasmas. So I like to launch the ball beyond the river. I like to provoke and don't care if they shoot at me. And I think that we might, I don't know, I know what we should measure to try to test this. It's not a theory yet. It's speculation, a mere speculation. So yes, this was my thinking.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the other geographical regions in the world that you would do you think are promising candidates for Hessdalen type phenomena?
Yeah, well, I've been looking around, and up to I would say 10 years ago, 5 years ago probably, I found at least 50 other regions in the world where recurrent light phenomena occur very often. And but I cannot say that they are the same kind of phenomenon. I can only say that there are light phenomena that occur more often. And in the United States, there are many locations like the Brown Mountain, for instance, the Yakima Indian Reservation, Marfa in Texas, and there is Joplin somewhere, I don't remember which state. There are many locations in which these things are happening, and also the Catalina Island, for instance, due to the so-called Tic-Tac incident that was witnessed by the American Navy that invites certainly several researchers to put instruments there to try to measure in a transparent way, in an aimed way, and not incidental way like the F-18 pilots, what's going on there. So there are also in Italy, there are several locations. I've been traveling not only in Stalin, but also in Arizona, in Ontario, Canada, and in Ireland, in several locations where this kind of phenomena appear. But I cannot say it's the same kind of phenomenon because sometimes the picture is confused. And there are some phenomena that are plasma looking, other phenomena that look like something more structured. And there are situations in which structured phenomena like flying saucer or triangles overlap with plasma balls.
When we're discussing anomalous phenomena, plasma, consciousness, it feels to me like these are subjects that have outsized influence on a whole constellation of additional subjects. What other disciplines or areas of research and study do you believe benefit from this kind of research that you've undertaken, both at Hessdalen and in other areas?
Very good questions. Well, I would say I could list. One clearly is particle physics. Okay. One is biophysics, and one is neurophysiology, because it's very important to study the reaction of our body, and in particular of the human brain, to electromagnetic fields that are produced in those areas. In fact, in Stalin, there is, it didn't happen to me, but there are situations in which people were feeling like on a boat, in a rocking motion. So this is typical of the very long wavelength VLF or ELF. In fact, we tried to measure something there and we found something, but we couldn't explain that. So, yeah, I would say biophysics, particle physics, neurophysiology, mostly, I would say. And also geophysics, clearly, because this kind of phenomenon could be triggered by something that is coming from the ground. Like piezoelectricity, for instance, they could trigger a light bulb, but what we don't know why this light bulb is, how to say, self-contained for so long time. There are several theories also from my friend, chemical physicist David Turner, who thinks that containment mechanism is electrochemical from water droplets in the atmosphere. There are many other theories, and it's too early to think about that. But there are several, yes, at least 4 or 5 scientific disciplines that would be involved in this research.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just for people who aren't familiar with your on-the-ground work in Hessdalen and other regions, it would be neat to potentially hear a couple of the circumstances that you were describing where you've personally witnessed these types of phenomena, because, you know, for a lot of people, it's sort of an abstract thing, right? So like, it's very interesting to me that you're a doctor in stellar physics who has been on the ground and like directly seen these things a number of times in close proximity, to the point where you and most people will be convinced that, you know, it exists. Now, how do I explain to other people that this exists? Yeah, so would you be able to just relate a couple of those times when you became convinced by what you saw that there is something actually occurring?
Yeah, well, I would say the second time I went to Stalin, it was a mission 22 years ago, in the beginning of August of the year 2000. I was with a colleague at the main observational point. We were 3 at the Aspaskjolen main spot of observation. And we had other 2 colleagues, 1 engineer and 1 physicist, 2 miles away from us in a different position. At some point, my colleague was also my boss at my radio astronomy department, told, look towards south, and there were 3 lights that were moving very slowly, and I didn't give importance to that. But these 3 lights came towards us, and I took my binocular. There was no time to video it because it was moving too fast. Slowly, but too fast for us in panning it. Okay, so it was a triangular thing with the 3 lights on the vertices, no light in the center, and I remember that it was about midnight, but it could be possible it was a Norwegian night, so there was some residual light, which allowed me to see clearly, very clearly, with the binocular, a shape, the triangular dark shape in the sky. This was looking like a flying machine, no doubt. And it was moving over our heads. It stopped over our heads and started to rotate and disappeared. So it didn't move away. It simply, those lights turned off slowly out. So it was looking really like a machine. This doesn't mean that, this doesn't prove that we were approached by an extraterrestrial flying object. But that was a machine. And strangely, I noticed that someone is doing experiments somewhere in Trondheim, which is not far away from Esdalen. It should be 200 kilometers, on drones, particular kind of drones. But that thing was very big. It was apparently much bigger than the little drones that they were experimenting. It was something different. It didn't finish here because 3 or 4 days later, in August 2000, should have been 5 of August, I was with 2 colleagues, and all of a sudden there was a small, very small oval light that passed over our heads and stopped in front of the fir trees that were in front of us, about 200 feet away from us. It stood still there for 10 minutes. It was there standing still. It was very low luminosity. It was completely different from the standard plasma lights that we see in Esdalen. It was like translucid. It was like a giant firefly. The day later, I went there, and with my steps, I could measure the distance, which was 90 meters. I took a photograph about that, of that thing, but I didn't have time to put a spectral grating. It was 40 centimeters. It was something like elliptical, floating, translucent. Yeah, these are things that happen. I was feeling cold, no fear, nothing, only interested in trying to observe and take data coldly. So this is what happened in Esdalen, and not only in Esdalen, but there were other events that happened to me personally, but this is not scientific, so
Sure.
this is what I can say in a way.
Wonderful. And thank you so much. So we have another question from an audience member. Joel asks, is there a favored theory that proposes the mechanism allowing such localized densities of energy to form at such low altitudes?
Yeah, well, I think that so far the most favored theory is that in particular conditions, rocks can produce electrical energy, in particularly through the piezoelectric mechanism, but not only through it. This is only one of the examples. It can happen that if rocks, in particular kind of rocks, like quartz, basalt, and very strong rocks, they can crash together due to several causes, like seismic shocks. They can create piezoelectric effect, which liberate electric energy in the air and create a plasma. The point is that we can explain this because it has been simulated in a laboratory, like from Professor Friedman Freund, geophysicist. He did that with the compression of rocks in a laboratory. He demonstrated that there is a lot of electricity that is produced. But what we don't understand, how is it possible that electricity, which is producing plasma in the air, is so self-contained in a spherical shape in general, not always spherical, but for so long time, because plasma is a heated gas that tends to expand, and this creates cooling. So the duration of this thing would be not more than a few seconds. Instead, what we see in Stalin is something that can last up to 2 hours of things that are like light bulbs that are self-contained and that don't change shape. Sometimes they spit other light bulbs, or they merge with other light bulbs, and they float. Okay, and but they don't exhaust themselves. Okay, so there must be a mechanism that is confining this plasma for so long time. One could be electrochemical mechanism through water droplet, like the theory of David Turner. Another one, something more exotic, like a central force, like a mini black hole, practically a central force that is collecting atmospheric air, turning it into a plasma due to high temperature that is being created, and also inflating, amplifying the magnetic field, which is frozen normally in the atoms, okay, in the universe in general. And the more this collapses and the more the magnetic field become strong, and the more this magnetic field works like a cage, able to contain plasma and to prevent it from expanding outside, so preventing it from cooling. So this is only an example. Okay, in reality there are several theories. It seems in the case of X-Dahlen and Symmetron, the origin is coming from the ground and not from space.
Are there any places in the solar system that you would look at, like maybe the sun or Jupiter or Mars, where you would find similar phenomena, and where maybe, since the human environment is not present there, could you think of like something about the human environment which might be making it more difficult to detect those things on Earth?
Well, in reality, there is a little planet. It's some kind of asteroid. In reality, it's Ceres, where some strange lights have been observed. Well, there are several interpretations of these lights. I don't remember now what geologists say, but this kind of phenomenon could happen everywhere in the solar system. and especially if there are seismic situations, because earthquakes, which can happen everywhere in the solar system, could crash the rocks against each other to produce this kind of plasma. The point is that if there is no atmosphere, there is no atmosphere, then you don't. It's difficult to create a plasma because you have nothing to heat up there. So could happen in Mars. It could happen in Venus. Maybe it could happen in giant planets like Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn. I think it's a phenomenon that is not only based on Earth. It's everywhere.
Mhm.
Based on your observations in Hesdalen, I find it very interesting that you saw sort of the variety of phenomena that are today the most prominent. You saw like an ellipsoid that appeared to be low luminosity, and then you saw a triangular form. It's it's a very interesting about the drone program in Trondheim. It's also interesting how I've heard the very similar type of story from so many people in this community of a black triangle appearing, moving towards or away or whatever, and then instantaneously accelerating straight up or dissipating as you're describing. Now, I know that like the UK Ministry of Defense had their top secret report that was distributed, and top leadership there was briefed in 2000 that these black triangles are an expression of a natural phenomenon akin to ball lightning, that in modern labs they produce things called skirmions that do couple and form triangular shapes and things like that. And you're saying like it very clearly was like it looked like a machine because it looked like there was a physical form in the middle. And they say, and they briefed their intelligence people briefed everyone saying, oh, the electromagnetic coupling mechanism appears to form a field through like which the light does not reflect, so it like looks black and stuff like that. If you could just maybe I'd like to hear your thoughts about like interpretation versus observation, since that's so key to these things. It's like the first thing, the light that's low luminosity, very small like that, it's more clearly like not at least a human machine. How, like when you were seeing that black triangle and it fully disintegrated, like how was your mind processing that? And that's sort of what we've been getting into with this stuff with our viewers, especially like this processing of what has been observed and how it conflicts with like what you expect from reality. Was that like a reality breaking moment for you when you saw that triangle dissipate above you?
No, not at all. And at that moment, I was completely calm because I had a goal, try to get much more, to absorb much more information as possible. So no, I didn't feel to jump all of a sudden into another reality, or that my mind was getting drunk or something. I was completely lucid and I was observing something that was concrete, that had nothing to do with the natural phenomenon. In that case, even if I was hunting for strange natural phenomenon, and my capability of interpreting reality was very lucid at that time. But I have to say, humanly, as a human being, I had a retarded reaction because after 2 weeks, I started to have strange nightmares or something. My reaction, human reaction, happened much later. Not much later, but later. But at that moment, everything was, I was very attentive to that. I was so attentive that it was also unconscious, because at some point I tried to approach that little light that we saw a few days after the triangular thing. And I approached, I was about something like 40, 50 meters away from that with my camera. I took a photo And my colleague was scared, told, like, come back immediately, it can be dangerous. And I could see several things also with the binoculars, very details that a photo doesn't show. Yeah, there was something that was not dealing about the natural phenomenon at all. This doesn't mean that this is alien or something. Could have been maybe also a prank. Why not? Why should I exclude that? No, I cannot. But that was artificial.
There are so many people in this community who literally go outside and effectively, pray or meditate on hoping for a UFO to present itself to them. And even though their lives are sort of dedicated to the belief in these phenomena, they've never actually seen one. So, like, was there any validation to you in actually like physically seeing it so close up and sort of getting the sense that, at least for you personally, it's sort of resolved that there is this type of thing?
Well, I don't know. This is a strange question. Can you please tell me? Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh, to reframe it?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. After spending, so much of your time and energy and just life's effort on trying to verify that these phenomena do exist, how was there a sense of like satisfaction, at least, or something, in ultimately actually being so physically close to one?
No.
Okay.
It was something.
You're a pro.
I was cold. I was completely cold. I was feeling like when I did a lot of observations with several kind of telescopes, and I was like when I was observing my telescope, only worried to try to get good information and good data. Okay, so no, I didn't feel any. Well, maybe some emotion with the triangular thing, yes. But the emotion in my case came not at the moment, but it came a few days later. Because to me, during the night, I woke up and thought, "Fuck, what happened? What was that?" But at that point, at that moment, no, there was because there is also a sense of duty that we have to try to collect everything, to be absolutely calm and take that for science. I think that the UFO phenomenon can be very dangerous because it could be used as a weapon to manipulate the mind of people in a very severe way, and it could create also new religions. So this thing is very, very dangerous. So people must. I understand that some of these things create particular sensations. I had particular lucid dreams that are marvelous. Okay, but we have to be careful because there are some people who created religions with this, and it can be very dangerous socially. So I'm wondering if there is an intelligence, if this intelligence wants to manipulate humanity in, how to say, collective way. It can succeed, and maybe some religions in the past were born in that way. But we have to be confident in our rationality and believe in ourselves, okay, and not delegate every responsibility to a God that is out of us, but only to believe in our mind, lucidity, honesty, and intelligence, okay? Because this is our freedom. Whatever comes out trying to manipulate our emotions is dangerous, okay? And this is my opinion. Even if I had some, I would say, lucid dreams in the past, but where you see these visions in the mind that are incredibly clear and that are creating a big sensation of peace, of truth, of something. In spite of that, I invite everyone who have this kind of experience to not share with the others because of two reasons. The first one is that you can manipulate the others with your things. The second thing is that if you speak of these beautiful things to the others could try to spoil your beautiful experience. So this is something that belongs to the private sphere. Okay, about spirituality, about we have to be careful because this phenomenon could manipulate reality if badly used.
Do you feel that is there a risk that perhaps you yourself were maybe not manipulated but influenced by your earlier interest in readings in UFOs?
No, not at all. I would say absolutely not, because I have to say I've been reading. I was looking here and there inside the books because they were so boring that I was not able to go on. Okay, there were these stories, some stories which I know by memory were interesting, but some others were it was not stimulating, okay, mentally. So no, not at all. I have never felt myself manipulated by UFO literature at all, in no way.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So, Dr. Teodorani, we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. Really excited about the conversation we had about consciousness, about research, about all the interdisciplinary considerations to this kind of work. Before you depart, where can our audience find you?
Yes, it's. I have a website. I don't remember what was his name. MassimoTeodorani.com. Look, you put website MassimoTeodorani.com. Yes, if I well remember, I go to see to do a check, but I think it's MassimoTeodorani.com. There are several articles that I put my selection of a very few, I would say. Very few. Yes, MassimoTeodorani.com. There are several articles that speak about something about my research, about my thoughts, and also about my music, because I do experiment with the synthesizers, with the electronic music.
Awesome. Well, again, Dr. Teodorani, thank you so much.
Thank you to you for having me here.
Of course. Take care.
Hello.
All right, gentlemen. That was awesome, right?
Yeah, that was really
Yes.
good. I always really like hearing Dr. Teodorani talk about his personal experiences observing the phenomena, even if it can't be scientifically proven. I think it's so interesting to think of a doctor in physics seeing something like that and then trying to figure it out from that perspective.
Yeah, see, I had familiarity with his work and had listened to some of his interviews, but somehow missed the story that he talked about today about this sort of delayed processing of his sighting and how it affected him, or sort of, how it how it kind of showed up in his, I guess, consciousness or memory or whatever a few days later. I think that's really interesting. And I deeply appreciate the almost scientific detachment he had towards recounting this experience and his insights. It was very cool to witness, right? The simultaneous open-mindedness alongside a analytical and objective discussion of what he personally has experienced.
There are a lot of people who study this subject, and I have to say that Dr. Teodorani, he's definitely one of, if not my favorite, academic investigating the subject. And one of the things I like so much about his work is that he is always so precise and clear about when he's speculating and when he's describing observations. And I also really like that he will dive quite deep into speculation. He's willing to do that, but in it, he always ties it to identifying that it is speculation so that it can be done more freely without, well, I mean, it's an interesting thing. It can always taint someone's perspective if you speculate too far, but I think he does it right if you're going to speculate.
Yeah, similar comment here from David. He was wonderful. I especially appreciated that he was a new voice bringing a new, unique perspective to the exploration. Yeah, and I also appreciate that he's been doing this for a while. Like his research in Hesselin is 20 years old. And I think that demonstrates a degree of commitment and rigor that's very exciting to see in the subject.
Absolutely. And he's got so many interesting things in his past. Like, for example, and didn't even touch on this today, but in 1996, after he went to the conference in 1994, got more interested, he sent in 96 a large paper to the Italian Ministry of Defense. And it was all about how to build a remote sensor station that could effectively identify UFOs. And he described the exact process to construct that kind of thing. And that was back in 96. He never heard back from the Ministry of Defense, but he's been at this project like his whole life. Like in 2004, there's a documentary from a British TV station with him in it where he's talking about, I think he's quoted as saying something like, I can prove these things exist. I just need to find a crazy rich guy. And it's
right, someone to actually put their money into it.
Yeah, and that's what Dr. Loeb described, is that a billionaire knocked on his door one day after hearing him talk about aliens or reading his book. And, it's just depends on if it lines up. And now Dr. Teodorani, at least indirectly, is getting his dream, his lifelong professional dream fulfilled. Yeah.
Did he?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lewis.
Something you've raised before, Campbell, is that maybe the Galileo project might be placing too much emphasis on visual confirmation, whereas what you really want is high-resolution spectral data, right?
Yes.
I guess Teodorani's he would be very cognizant of that, wouldn't he? And I guess he would be bringing that to the Galileo project, that realization.
Yes, he specializes in exactly imaging with spectral gratings and things like that based on his work as an astrophysicist, especially as a stellar astrophysicist. He specializes in observing stars, and that's how they assess the different characteristics of stars through this exact process. It's unfortunate we didn't get into it more. I mean, all the subjects we did touch on, I don't think I would swap any out, but it's just a testament to how much stuff he's involved with that we didn't even touch on the details of his spectra work. Although one of his blog posts, I think 4 or 5 back, I'm pretty sure it's literally titled like UFOs and spectroscopy. So he gets into the details there very effectively on his blog, on his website. And what did you, Luis, what was your favorite sort of thing that Dr. Teodorani mentioned? Was there anything that stood out to you?
Oh, let's see. I'm interested in the energy levels. Breaking up here. Sorry, my internet keeps breaking up a bit. The energy calculation aspect based on distance and luminosity. there's always an issue about if it's just eyewitness reports, then how objective is that? But if you can, at least film something, then you might be able to get a more objective measurement of the energies involved. So I think that's really key. I do wonder though whether if you can't propose a mechanism for something like how meaningful is it to talk about energy?
Yes, and his discussion of energy is exactly as you're saying. It's based off of interpreting the distance to the object from having multiple observation posts, and then photographing it with particular kinds of film. And yeah, I think it provides something. It's not anything concrete, and this is the kind of thing that is published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, founded by Peter Sturrock, I believe, at Stanford, in order to actually publish things that are sort of like not 100% solid. And so, Dr. Vallée did something very similar back in the early 90s. He had a paper published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration that details, I think, 5 UFO cases and estimating their power levels based on the luminosity. So it's something that's been done for quite some time. And obviously, since UFOs haven't been proven to this point, it has limited value, but maybe tells us something. Leah, like, what was your favorite thing that Dr. Teodorani mentioned?
Behind the scenes, I was super excited when you brought up the subject of self-organization, emergent self-organization, and its relationship to consciousness. I very much appreciated him digging into Bohm and I think Penrose as well in his discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wrote down a quote from him about how anomalies are an alarm clock to look at other parts of reality. And I love that, right? Like, I love this idea that rather than glossing over outlier data or phenomena, instead he reframes it as an indication that there is something to explore and to investigate. And he struck me very much, Campbell, you had described him as like a rogue scientist, and he very much struck me as that, as kind of possessing this almost golden age curiosity without having either a teleology about his research and findings, and being driven out of, I would say, pure desire for scientific inquiry rather than orienting himself towards a desired outcome or theory. So I was very, very impressed, I think in his response around scientific methodology.
It's something that I've found very inspiring about Dr. Teodorani. And when I first found out about his work in May of last year, 2021, I was so shocked that he wasn't better known on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, considering the amount that he's done on this subject, even to the point of ultimately addressing the European Parliament on the subject of UFOs in, if I remember correctly, 2010. So, like, he's a very notable figure in the UFO community in many respects. And I mean, even 2014, he was recruited by Leslie Kean and Chris Mellon as they were on the board of directors of the UFO Data Project. His paper is still on there as their technical paper, and he's their lead scientist to get data to verify the UFOs exist. So his like, I feel like his sort of like the way that he approaches the subject, I think, would have a lot of appeal if people knew like that he existed, essentially. And it's blown my mind over and over again that people don't really know that he does exist, and he's just been in the background for so long. I feel like he might have a moment at some point soon on this side of the Atlantic, especially with the Galileo project sort of ramping up, though. But there are so many things that we could have talked to him about that we just didn't have time to. So maybe we can have him back sometime.
Yeah, for sure. I would have loved to dig into the Galileo project, less about the specific work he's doing and more about his thoughts on what would make the project a success? Like, what does he envision this project accomplishing or contributing, and how he sees it moving the subject forward and increasingly legitimizing it for scientific inquiry.
Well, as Louise said, actually, it's a really interesting point. Like, when the experience on the ground has shown him that the spectra are what really matter, and what we've seen from natural science, earth sciences, like proving sort of like breakthrough science with the ball lightning in 2014 at spectra. And then Dr. Loeb has very heavily emphasized the optical, and this point that Louis made, that maybe they're overemphasizing the optical, and just the philosophy of it is very interesting. It's like, is it primarily to just make content that you can raise more money with? Like, that's a very negative way of looking at it. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but if they prove the UFOs are natural phenomena, which is something that Dr. Loeb has also multiple times hinted at in multiple interviews, then the money's maybe would at least dramatically reduce from the public, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then what would they do? Because he has huge ambitions. Like, he wants to send one of those postcard-sized robotic probes all the way over to Proxima Centauri using a laser as the energy source. So, like, he's got a few $1 billion to go on that one.
Right.
Are either of you? What do you guys? How do you interpret the delay on this major report? Do you think it was intentional, waiting out the midterm?
Oh, the government report?
Yes. The fact that it's still not out.
So, go ahead, Louis. What's your perspective?
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's just another case of government red tape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think Lewis is probably correct that there's red tape. I think what feels to me most likely is either that it's straight up late, or that it's been delivered in some classified format and has yet to go through any kind of redaction for public consumption. That seems to me very on brand for the federal government. But I have also, given the elections that occurred yesterday in the US, I think there was this maybe community perception that the report may be delayed or somehow manipulated in order to influence the electoral process, right? Like, by distributing this report, it would have an outsized effect on who people vote for, etc. And this feels to me like assigning an outsized importance on the subject of UFOs and UAP to the popular imagination. Put another way, I don't think that this is a one issue determinant in how people vote or who they support. So I am extremely hesitant to attribute its delay to the midterm elections or concerns about interfering in them by delivering this report. But that's largely where I sit right now.
That makes sense. That's sort of I think that's pretty much my read too. It's like the interpretation that would be sort of saying like, oh, it's been delayed because they're afraid of the fallout and stuff like that. That's certainly, like, in my view, the least likely explanation. I mean, it's always, of course, possible that maybe this is the report that's going to say extraterrestrials are here finally. But I don't think that's at the top of the list. So it probably is some level of inefficiency. I've wondered myself, like, because in the internal documents about national security and stuff, they do heavily say that they don't really want people sort of focusing on UFOs. It's seen as a little bit of a a topic that can be exploited by foreign actors. So it's like, it makes me wonder, like, if they are gonna try to sort of ramp down public interest, this would be consistent with that. I think, like, it's like there's not a huge, it's like now it's been delayed. The sort of news was like, there were a bunch of news stories leading up to it. Now people maybe won't care. Maybe it'll be coming out on a Friday evening like they like to do.
Yeah, I mean, we've witnessed the same repeated dynamic within the community around any release of this information, where there's this collective eager anticipation, various and sundry shadowy figures from the anonymous depths of Twitter making claims about what may be contained in this report. Nothing subsequently comes up, which for the true believers is proof positive that voices are being repressed. If something does come out, whatever is delivered will fail. No matter what the report says, it will inevitably fail to satiate the collective community. And what amazes me, I think, is the predictability of this cycle within the community in general, and then the knock-on effect that it has on the community, where there seems to be no meaningful self-reflection on the promises that community members make about this report that fail to come to pass, right? Like, no matter what individuals say about this report, promising it will be delivered, saying they have secret information or access to hidden sources, then if that fails to materialize, there's no kind of collective pushback or interrogation of why that may be. And so I think on a personal level, watching this dynamic constantly play out is extremely telling, and also obviously super frustrating, particularly as someone who beats the drum of like accountability and integrity and standards of evidence all the time. But I also think it collectively feeds this community belief that because people aren't nice on UFO Twitter, the government's withholding disclosure. So if we were just collectively nicer to any number of anonymous Twitter accounts, we would know what's going on by now. And I think that that's such a strange and almost infantile assessment on the dynamics we're watching play out.
It feels like religious thinking, and and religious thinking is rooted in a lot of that stuff, like hierarchy and punishment for being bad and things like that. So I definitely am getting I feel what you're saying. Let's see what this is.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
this is another change of subject, right? We have James Fox's documentary, Moment of Contact, I think. A question coming in: any thoughts about the alleged Varginha alien video supposedly to be released soon? Right, again, it's always soon. Yeah, so what last I heard is there was an offer out from James Fox, the director of this new film, for $200,000 for an individual who purportedly has video evidence of a creature recovered from this event. How do I put this? They should be offering a bounty of hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions of dollars for this kind of evidence if it's proven to be factual. I would love to see if there is factual or even very good evidence of this. So far, the video stills that I have seen propagated across the internet have largely been taken from, let's see, 1990s alien autopsy videos on Fox, screen grabs from old X-Files videos or old X-Files episodes, etc. So I would love to be wrong. Let me put it that way. I would love to be wrong. I will eat crow on a live stream if $200,000 turns up an actual video of an alien. I would love nothing more than to be wrong about this, but I don't think it's going to happen. There's my hot take. What about you, Campbell? What about you, Lewis?
Yeah, Louise, you start with it. What do you think of that?
I'll believe it when I see it. Over to you.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I saw the fallout on Reddit of James Fox. I can't remember what it was, maybe Fox News or something, when he made
did
that.
like an AMA on Reddit too.
Okay, I
And
didn't see that.
it went about as well as you actually it went I was gonna say it went as well as you'd expect, but it basically was people asking over and over, do you have proof? Is there a video of the purported alien in your documentary? And he kind of evasively answered those questions.
Yeah.
And the collective, the unwashed masses of Reddit were basically like, okay, you don't have anything. Next, what's next?
That's something interesting too. Like Reddit, like the UFO community, like there is like a heavy belief, but they also have a bit more of a mixing with the skeptical or critical arguments do make their way into the conversation. I'd argue more so, at least. Yeah, and so James Fox, exactly. Like, so he made that claim in that one interview that seemed explosive. He made, like, the language he used initially was something that sounded like certain. And then he just has since then, and a bunch of people stood up and said, like, this guy's legit, this guy's legit. And then since then he's been walking it back. So it doesn't look good. It looks like it was promotional. Maybe he got caught up in the moment and spoke too broadly, or like, like you're on TV. He doesn't do huge interviews frequently, like on mainstream news. So it makes sense if he got a little excited and just used a word that's definitionally incorrect. So I'm not expecting anything from that. Did you guys notice that Dr. Teodorani specifically mentioned this case, though, earlier in the interview? He used it as the example of and this is what I find so funny about his stuff, right? He mixes, he's like, well, the triangles seem to be mechanical. However, in Brazil, when they're shooting laser beams, I see a plausible natural mechanism through stellar physics. It's like, that one sounds crazier to me than the triangle, but maybe, like, what did you pick that up, Leah? What did you think of that when he started talking about that?
I picked that up, and I also see when he brought that up, the other thing it connects to in my mind is the dangers of encountering these kinds of experiences or having these experiences. And he touched on this. We've touched on this too, either bodily harm or death or physical danger associated with this. And it feels like in popular conversation about this subject, that's an element that's frequently dismissed or ignored. But he seemed to take a very genuine perspective that this is a potentially very dangerous circumstance to find oneself in. And I don't just mean the psychosocial side, I mean like the physical danger associated with these events. So I thought that was very interesting when he brought that up.
Was he referring to the Colaris incident or the Vagina sighting?
Okay, you're right. I mixed it up.
He was talking about Colaris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But still out of Brazil, I think, right? It doesn't. I think Valet talks about this event.
Yeah.
Right.
There's actually, that the Colaris case. I just don't find it plausible that if it was an intelligence, that they would be shooting people with whatever lasers or plasmas, and they would be like, what's the point of doing that? And secondly, there was also a claim within that broader incident that a guy was being drawn up into the UFO, and he held onto a tree, and then like the UFO gave up. Stuff like that just really speaks to this being kind of those interpretations, like these things are attacking us or they're trying to kidnap us. Those are human interpretations, and I think there was might have been something else going on, some natural phenomena, but I just don't see like aliens behaving that way. I'm sorry.
It's a good point. Like, the behaviors are very hard to understand, or the motions, I guess, because behavior implies intent in some way, for perhaps living thing. And it's like Dr. Teodorani has mentioned that the motions appear to at least based on some descriptions, exceed what you would expect from purely electrostatics, which is something that he then finds interesting from this speculative perspective of maybe there's some form of direction occurring from within through this self-organizing mechanism. So like there seem to be plausible sufficient explanations that are purely mechanistic, and yet people who get very heavily involved with them also become convinced, from what I can see, that there is a more conscious element to it. And I find that very interesting, and I'm not sure exactly what that origin is, but the physical reality of the objects potentially meeting sort of the observational criteria of like a neutron star, and a stellar physicist being like, observationally, I think this looks like a neutron star. And even like the beams, and like even the suction upward, look up the magnetized frog experiment, and you can see that applying an electromagnetic field to an object in Earth's atmosphere produces a levitation of that object that looks like anti-gravity, because electromagnetism can produce that kind of effect. So anyway, I guess long story short there, I'm just saying it's pretty fascinating that these things could be natural, and we don't know. But I was really happy to hear Dr. Teodorani explain that side of it to us today.
Yeah, and I think, Campbell, you're touching on something that I always find fascinating at the heart of the subject, which is that this is so transdisciplinary, or experiences are transmedium in nature, where we talk about the relationship between observed and experienced physical phenomena, and then these second order effects of consciousness or psychological response, and how also there's this inclination to transpose human psychology, and by extension intent, onto these events. Like to assign some kind of objective or goal to particular behaviors that are witnessed or experienced. And I think in turn, we almost anthropomorphize them by assuming that they must behave based on, I guess, incentives or drivers that we as humans can relate to, instead of being just outside of human conception or cognition. And I'm not even attributing like intelligence or consciousness to these events. I'm just more thinking about how we tend to, I guess, overlay human behavior onto phenomena that we observe all the time.
It's an excellent point. And it would almost be strange if we didn't, right? Because human history, the origin is that literally every single thing around us had a life spirit to it. Even like the stones, the air, the water, everything was alive. And, we've kind of reduced that progressively to this tiny sliver of reality that we don't have like the perfect modern scientific focus on yet. And that's what Dr. Teodorani is like looking at and trying to get at the heart of it. And that's the thing that you pointed out, that alarm clock thing. It's like, this is where the true answers that there still are out there maybe are hiding.
Yeah, and it also it speaks to like the emergent nature of scientific inquiry. That science, like in, I think, popular imagination, we tend to treat science as this closed system, but the reality is that if done properly, like science as a framework exists as like an emergent process from an open dynamic system. Like it should kind of incrementally creep forward and expand in how it's used to understand or interpret events, and like events that are sort of at the edge of what we would conventionally identify as science. Like you said, these anomalous phenomena. I mean, I keep meaning to read Thomas Kuhn's book on scientific revolution, because I feel like at the heart of things, that's what so much for me what these conversations are about. They're about not dismissing or denigrating experiences and anomalous phenomena so much as refactoring the frameworks and methodologies we use to interpret our world around us. And I think, actually, pursuant to what we were talking about around the presence, like transposing consciousness or intent onto things. I mean, the other thing is, like, we watch, to me, what feels like an increasingly emergent idea in consciousness and in areas of physics and psychology and also in psychedelic studies is panpsychism. Um, and panpsychism seems to be gaining increasing legitimacy among some of the, I would say, intellectual towers across a number of different disciplines. And I think also that panpsychism, again, not only is extremely interesting and compelling insofar as treating consciousness as an emergent phenomenon, but it also, for me, what I think is very interesting is what it implies about the uniqueness of humanity against the rest of the universe. Because for so long, like, humans have envisioned themselves as being unique creatures by virtue of consciousness. And this inverts that assessment. If we start seeing consciousness as common or even universal, suddenly this trait or characteristic is no longer a unique factor possessed only by human beings.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Like, it ties into religion so deeply in some ways, and it is almost like a deeper cosmological point, how like centering the universe like within each individual versus an idea that consciousness can be sort of a mechanistic emergent phenomenon resulting from these natural essentially magnetohydrodynamics. Like, even if there's, sometimes I wonder when I'm reading this stuff, and it's not my main worldview, but it makes me wonder sometimes when I see how plasma replicates a lot of these, like, subcellular processes, and like DNA looks like similar to plasma under certain environmental conditions, the way it spirals and self-regulate, or self-forms and self-replicates and things like that. And it makes me wonder, it's like, is everything just like a series of these tiny like energy vortices that we're talking about at different scales and stuff? It really comes down to like the basics of reality, and it's something you wouldn't really necessarily expect going into UFOs, that it steps into these other things like you're describing.
Yeah, you know what you just reminded me of is a lot of the conversations over the summer about whether or not the Lambda language model indicated like machine consciousness or machine intelligence. This was a natural language model that could produce unstructured text in response to pretty nuanced and sophisticated questions. For, I think, the average person, it probably seems conscious, because the average person, I think, one, they use the Turing test as kind of their litmus test of consciousness, which is, this is not the podcast to talk about why that's not right, but I think that's very common. The other is that most people who don't work and engage with these kinds of language processing models have any conception of exactly how sophisticated and powerful they've become. But the third thing is that language is fundamentally computational. So the strength and sophistication of these language models points less to a general language intelligence or machine consciousness than it does to the computational nature of how language and communication exists. So basically, and put in other words, you can reduce communication through language to a computational process, to equations, to decision trees, etc. And I bring this up because what these discussions about plasma behaviors remind me of is not that they necessarily indicate consciousness as much as they point to the universality of self-organizing behavior. And self-organization in complex systems, these are dynamics that are exhibited repeatedly and routinely, virtually everywhere, whether it's in the formation of an urban center or in the biological body with different metabolic processes, or in electrified plasma research phenomena, etc. Like these sort of processes of self-organization, which can look a whole lot like consciousness and like intent. Like I definitely encourage anyone listening to look into John Conway's The Game of Life, because this is sort of the entryway to exploring this idea that self-organization is algorithmic or computational. It's a property or behavior that can be measured and assessed and to some degree predicted based on different factors. And it's something we see, again, sort of in all different spaces, both in our lived experience and then also scientifically, and also, you know, in terms of transmitting information and thought.
It really speaks, what you're saying really speaks to how these things really end up coming together and originating from a foundational worldview, like a cosmology, your way of processing reality around you. And it's like, for example, like I am like, you know, philosophically, I would say I'm a materialist, I'm an atheist. I wouldn't assert definitively these things are true. I think that's, you know, logically incorrect to do that. That's just my worldview. When I look at things like these kinds of things, like, oh, plasma actually meets the definitional criteria of life, I see that a lot of people, that leads them to say, well, therefore, like, it seems like maybe these plasma forms are alive. And I find it's interesting because me, subjectively, I go the opposite direction. Naturally, instinctively, I say to myself, well, that's interesting. If life can just be this sort of like sequence of things that is, you know, quantifiable, like what is life? Perhaps life is just, I mean, and I suspect it's the case, but life appears to be purely mechanistic, a series of natural processes that, whether entirely determined as historically thought in physics, or subject to randomness, as we now believe through quantum physics, none of that has to do with anything with free will, in quotes. So you know, so it like for me, when I hear something like that, I go one route, which is like kind of like everything's just mechanistic, everything's just natural, and that gives me a sense of peace fundamentally in one way, that like there isn't this all-powerful entity sort of like waiting to judge me or whatever. There's a relief to that in my mind, and I understand the other way too. But I think that the heart of the cosmology worldview of the people perceiving these phenomena, it is so centrally important, and I'm very happy that we're sort of getting at this in these conversations.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Well, we are also now officially over time, so it's, I think we'll wrap things up. Before we do, Lewis, Campbell, what's going on with you guys?
Well, people can head over to uapstudy.com. That's all I have to say. Yes.
Lewis, how are you?
I'm actually reading a book called Secret Rituals of the Men in Black by Alan Greenfield. I think it's basically just, well, I can talk more about it in a future episode, but this is like one of those kind of playing with numbers type of things, like the Bible code. I don't know if you're familiar with that saga. I think that's what's going on here. But I've seen a video, you know, interview of Greenfield. He seems very, very sincere, but you know, that's no check on reality.
Yes, sincerity.
But anyway,
not.
it's a fun book.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. So we will be returning to our normal time next Wednesday, November 16th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll be welcoming Rather be squidding onto the show for discussion. I'm not totally sure what we'll talk about. Hopefully something involving non-human intelligence, since that seems to be what he's interested in right now, and it's one of my favorite subjects.
That'd be great.
People can, awesome. So people can check out, we have a link to our Discord in the show description. You'll also find links to our various and sundry Twitter accounts and blogs. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe on the channel as we help build our audience. And finally, if there's any subjects or guests that any of the audience are interested in us meeting with, talking about, or exploring together, feel free to either leave a comment or shoot me a message on Twitter. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Take care out there.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.